right, the postseason is officially here as we welcome you into Get Me The Brandy. Hailey Hunter alongside Dan Potash and Paul Steigerwald. Great to have Staggy join us on today's show as well. And guys, you remember when Vegas Oddmakers, they gave Penguins a 91% chance of missing the playoffs? Well, as an optimistic Penguins fan, including myself, people told me I was crazy. It does feel good to say I told you so. But as they get ready for their fifth playoff series against the Flyers now during the Crosby era, love to hear from you guys on just, hey, the excitement, how intense you expect this series to be. And Dan, I mean, you were there for those last four. Just take us through kind of the intensity of those series and how that might translate into this one.
I remember when I got my first taste of Penguins versus Flyers, it actually started in the regular season. And I thought it was intense and fun to watch. And I, having moved here in 2000, I knew about the rivalry from afar, but it's not the same. It's like someone telling me from Florida that they know what it's like when the Dodgers play the Giants in baseball growing up in Los Angeles. I knew what it was like firsthand. But I was surprised to learn, and Staggy, correct me if I'm wrong, the first time the two teams met in the postseason was in 1989, late 80s.
That is right.
I can't believe that for two teams that came into existence in the late, 67, that it took that long for the two rivals in Pennsylvania to clash in the postseason. So, you throw all the storylines together and everything in the history of the two teams. I thought it was really unique that it took that long, and that this is just the 8th time that these two teams will meet in the postseason. Just adds to it.
Well, the reason it took so long was because, the rivalry really was a rivalry from the Penguins' side, because the Penguins couldn't beat the Flyers in Philly for 15 years. And they finally did beat them in that 88-89 season. And what happened was that's when the Flyer fans started to dislike the Penguins. Other than that, they had no real regard for the Penguins because the Penguins always lost to their team. But once the Penguins started to push back in 89 in those playoffs, it was a 7-game series. Kenny Reggett, our good friend Kenny, who owns Bar 31, of course, in Bridgeville and is still here in Pittsburgh and a big part of the Penguins alumni, he came in and won Game 7. It looked like the Penguins were going to win that series, but the Flyers stole it. And Kenny Reggett was the guy who won Game 7. Ron Hextall was injured. So that was the beginning of it. And that's when I think the real rivalry started to boil up between the Penguins and the Flyers, because you probably remember that famous clip of Robbie Brown being chased around the ice by Ron Hextall. That was the beginning of that. And then it took a long time for the two teams to get together again. You're right, Dan. It is kind of weird. But in the interim, we had a lot of annoying series with the New York Islanders.
Good substitute. Good number 2 there. Yeah.
So do you guys think it's going to be as an intense, rivalry as we've seen in the past?
I think it has the chance to be. I mean, already this year you had an incident with Trevor Zegras knocking Nola Chari's helmet off during a little scrum type situation, and that got things stirred up. And he has a knack of getting under people's skin, and I think the Flyers, just knowing with Rick Tocchet behind the bench and Todd Reardon there and Mark Recchi, they're going to try to push the Penguins' buttons. And the Flyers have always kind of done stuff like that. Even if they don't have the real tough guys they have always had, they still have that sort of attitude about how to play hockey. And I think their fans kind of expect it. One thing, Dan, I will corroborate is when you go to Philly, they show highlights of fights and stuff on their big board. The Penguins don't do that. They show goals being scored and phenomenal moments in Penguins history. The Flyers really love that stuff, and it wouldn't surprise me one bit if there's something that happens in Game 3 or Game 4 that will kind of spark that animosity and have it carry on through the series.
If I'm correct, Staggy, they're not supposed to do that. They're not supposed to celebrate violence for fans via the scoreboard in the arena. But every year
the Flyers do what the Flyers do. That's kind of who they are. They're kind of villains. It's like a built-in villainy that they have. And the Penguins kind of bring that out of them because the Penguins are so good. And it started with that Crosby, Darian Hatcher thing in this era, when Hatcher high-sticked Crosby, broke a tooth, blood coming out of his mouth. Sid's lying on the ice. Darian Hatcher's tugging at his stick and scraping it against Crosby's face. And then the fans get on Crosby and they call him, Ken Hitchcock, their coach at that time, called Sid a whiner. That carried on for years. And so it really makes for a lot of fun. I mean, it's probably what playoff hockey should be all about. I think back in the days of the original six, when you played each other 12 times during the year and you always found yourself playing the same teams in the playoffs. I mean, they hated each other so much back then that they couldn't even ride on the same train together. That's how much the teams hated one another. And I think there is kind of a built-in, or at least a hatred that's almost bubbling up, and the playoffs have a tendency to bring it to the fore.
So, Staggy, you mentioned Sidney Crosby, and this will be the 5th time that Sidney Crosby will beat the Flyers in the postseason. His overall record with the Penguins in winning a series against them, not bad. It's done pretty well. What brings out the best? And maybe I should start with what brought out the best in Mario Lemieux against the Flyers? What brought out the best in Jaromir Jagr against the Flyers? And then how does the torch just continue to get passed with superstars with the Penguins when they take on the Flyers?
Well, I think in Mario's case, he had never made the playoffs till he played the Flyers that year. We swept the New York Rangers in the first round, and then we played the Flyers. And keep in mind now, the Flyers had not lost to the Penguins in Philly until that season for 15 years. And the Penguins were able to finally beat them. And there was a kind of a respect that the Penguins had for the Flyers at that time, knowing that they were so hard to beat. And suddenly the Flyers had a newfound respect for the Penguins. I remember, the Flyers sort of realizing real quickly that Mario was a force. And so in that playoff series, Mario was unbelievable. He had that 8-point game. And I just think it built from there. I don't know that Mario had any specific animosity towards the Flyers other than the fact that he wanted to beat them very badly because they couldn't beat him. And finally, they were able to do that in the regular season. Then they got into the playoffs against them. And, that frustration continued because the Flyers, as I said, came back and won that series. As for Sid and the torch being passed, so many years went by. The Penguins finally started to beat the Flyers, if you remember, in the early 90s. And that's when Mario was able to really kind of, prevail, if you will. And they started beating the Flyers. The Flyers weren't very good back then. The Penguins became the best team. And then it was hard for the Flyers to beat the Penguins. So I think what happened was the torch didn't necessarily get passed other than the fact that maybe, by the time the Penguins played the Flyers in 2009, Mario was the owner of the team. And so he had a great understanding of how hard they are to beat. And Sid kind of picked up on that. And then, of course, as I said, that situation with Darian Hatcher, that made Sid really have a problem with the Flyers. And he really started to rack up all the points against them because he really, really brings his game to another level when he plays against them.
Yeah, 60 goals against the Flyers, more than any other player in NHL history, not to mention every single game Sid's played against the Flyers this season, he scored. So I'm sure they're really excited to see him in the playoffs. But when you look at special teams too, he just never doesn't score against them. I wonder if that might be a big part of the series as well. And actually, looking back to the last few games against the Flyers, that was a big part of the outcome. Penguins with top 10 power plays and PKs, and then you have the Flyers. They're 23rd on the PK and the league last power play. So, what do you guys think, Staggy? Do you think that's going to be a big part of it, especially with how Erik Karlsson's been manning that top power play unit right now?
Well, I think, goaltending and special teams are always a huge thing in the playoffs. I think whatever the Flyers' number was for the season is kind of irrelevant. And for that matter, so is the Penguins. You look at the personnel, you see how the two teams match up with one another because the regular season is history. You get into a playoff series, teams start to learn each other's tendencies. And I believe, adjustments are really important to be made from one game to the next, sometimes from one power play to the next, because you get an idea of what the other team's trying to do to you, and you try to adjust to that. And you have to be pretty quick to do that. You got to be a quick study. So I think that the special teams will be very important, but I think the Flyers have added a couple of young players to their mix, which are going to make them a little bit more dangerous on the power play. And of course, as you said, Erik Karlsson has had such a phenomenal year, and he's such a big part of anything the Penguins are doing right now. I'm really anxious to see how he brings his game up in the playoffs too. I don't know if he can play at any higher level than he was playing in the last month of the season, but it will be very interesting to see how Rick Tocchet goes after the Penguins. That was a phrase he used the other day after they clinched. He said, "We're going to go after those guys." And that's a classic kind of Flyer, Rick Tocchet mentality. In other words, we're going to target those guys in some way, whether it be trying to get them off their game, like Gino, maybe trying to get him wound up to take penalties, or maybe it's just Sidney Crosby being matched up against Couturier, who's always played well against, especially Gino, but also a little bit against Sid. But he's a good face-off guy. There'll be matchups within the matchup. You know what I mean? And that's something you got to watch for. You watch for it after the first couple of games. You'll start to see what each coach is trying to do to get the edge. And I really believe that whatever happened in the regular season, even in the regular season series, will not be as important as what you see develop over the course of the first couple of games and how that plays out through the series.
You know, Staggy, you mentioned some of the young guys for the Flyers, and we had Phil Bourque on Get Me The Brandy just last week after the Penguins clinched a spot in the postseason. And I mentioned the essence or the having the big three on this roster. Okay, so they lead by example. Anyone, even another established veteran, can learn from what those three players have done for 20 plus years. What about the kids on the Penguins lineup, like Kindle, Shea, Soderblom, maybe even Avery Hayes if he finds his way onto the ice? How do they learn from them by watching their play on the ice and try to elevate, or not elevate, just play their game in the postseason?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's the beauty of having a guy like Sidney Crosby in your lineup, because his experience is, he will show the way in terms of his calmness in the locker room, between periods, on the bench. Just the way his demeanor will definitely be a factor, I think, in helping those kids get used to it. Ben Kindle's, as you guys know, Ben Kindle's stall is right next to Sid's. So he's going to be able to kind of through osmosis see how he should carry himself in the playoffs. The big thing is early on, the energy is really flowing, the adrenaline. You got to be careful. You got to be disciplined. And you can't be afraid. And I don't think any of these guys will be. I think they'll all play the game. And as for the Flyers, you were talking about kids. Like, for instance, the Penguins have 822 man games of experience in the playoffs. I think the Flyers, there's 120 man games between Garnett Hathaway, Couturier, and one other player. I'm trying to think who that other one is. But the three of them, they're all role players. They're not guys who are going to make a big impact in the game necessarily. But the Penguins have the guys who won Stanley Cups and have had just vast experience in the playoffs. I think that's important, actually. I really do. I remember when the Penguins went into the playoffs in 2007. I know you remember this, Dan, with Michael Therrien behind the bench, and they had to play the Ottawa Senators, who were one of the best teams in the league. They were very experienced. The Penguins were all newbies. That was when Sid and all those guys, Colby Armstrong, Max Talbot, they were Gino. They were all young players, and they went in. And actually, the series was even after 2 games.
Yep.
But after that, the Senators just blew the doors off the Penguins. I mean, the Penguins were just totally shell shocked by the Senators. There was such a difference between regular season hockey and playoff hockey. And I think that could happen to the Flyers early on here at first, when they see the difference between what playoffs look like and what regular season hockey looks like. Even though people say, wow, we're playing on our playoffs already here in March, our games are so important. Sorry, but there's nothing like playoffs, okay? It's just a completely different level. And I think the Penguins, because of their experience, will know what that level is right away. And it might take the Flyers and maybe some of the younger players on the Penguins team a little while to really embrace just how hard they have to play and how desperate you have to play. Like, you got to be so desperate in front of your own net, make sure that you're protecting that. The other night when Stu Skinner allowed a goal in a game against Washington, he was on his butt in the crease and the puck was under his right leg. And they scored a goal there. And the Penguins weren't anywhere to be found. It took a while, and they finally jammed the puck in. Can't do that in the playoffs. You've got, I can remember, when we played the Red Wings in 08, they would fill the net with their own players. There'd be 4 red jerseys in the cage, protecting the house. And the Penguins kind of learned that year by just experiencing it firsthand. That's how you have to play it. In '09, that's what they were doing. And Dan would remember Rob Scuderi, the big save he made in the crease behind the goaltender Fleury. And that's what I'm talking about. See, those are the kinds of things that Sid and those guys just know almost by rote. They just know how to do it. They've been in so many playoff games. And the Flyers players are going to have to learn that. And I'm just hoping the Penguins can get an edge on them in the series before they start to figure it out.
Yeah, that's something you mentioned, like slot protection and how important that is in the playoffs. That's something that Dan Muse mentioned last night, that he wants the guys to clean up going into Saturday. But I mean, Dan, you mentioned all of the young guys who've never had this playoff experience before. You think of Ryan Shea, Ben Kindle, Igor Chinikov, Avery Hayes, Emmer Soderblom. We'll call them playoff rookies, if you will. Have never been in the postseason before. I'm curious who you guys are expecting to maybe have, a breakout first playoff season. For me, you talked about being desperate, Staggy. I'm really excited to see what Igor Chinikov does. I feel like he's a really good big game player. We've seen him come up in big moments of a game in terms of momentum swings. So I'm really excited to see what Chinikov can do. But what do you guys think? Who's going to kind of shine in the postseason?
Well, he's certainly, a huge weapon for the Penguins that does seem to bring his level up a little bit in bigger games. He's a clutch player. I expect him to play really well and score a big goal or two in the series. I'll be interested to see how Ben Kindle handles it, because he's a pretty important player for the Penguins. And, I want him to be able to get to another level with his game. He's fearless. I can say that. I think one of the things that you have to be careful about is you don't want players making mistakes of commission where they're trying to do too much. They might turn the puck over, things like that. You do have to kind of simplify your game in the playoffs, I think. And the Flyers play kind of a strict defensive system under Rick Tocchet. They'll kind of frustrate you a little bit with that. So I think the Penguins have to be careful not to kind of force offense against them. And I think they'll be looking for ways to exploit the Penguins with maybe trying to get behind their defense. We've seen that a little bit here in the last couple of weeks of the season, where teams are sneaking guys behind our D. And with Erik Karlsson and Chris Letang liking to move up a bit, I would look for Rick Tocchet to try to exploit that, to have guys fly in the zone early, trying to look for ways to get breakaways or 2-on-1s against the Penguins, who may be trying to force offense a little bit too much against them. So, and those are little things you have to be really careful of. Another thing is shorthanded goals. Like the Flyers last year, Rick Tocchet wasn't coaching them, but if you remember last season, they scored a ton of shorthanded goals under John Tortorella. And shorthanded goals are really big deals in the playoffs. They can turn a whole series around, and I think the Penguins have given up a lot of them in the regular season. They're going to have to be really careful about that in the playoffs, because those can actually be maybe the most significant thing that can happen in the course of a game or even a series in the playoffs.
Hailey, you mentioned Igor Chinikov, and I think it's fair to say that as soon as he joined the team, he joined it at playing like at this level. Like he was already a lion in a cage waiting to explode and run free. Yeah, and so he's maintained that level of play. My hope, our hope, everyone's hope is that he continues to do that. At the same time, Soderblom, I don't want to say he started slowly, but he was quiet. But now he's really made his presence felt over the last few games. I'm intrigued to see if that continues into the postseason. However, I don't know how things will shake out when or if Connor Dewar and Blake Lizotte return to the lineup, and if we get caught in a numbers game as far as who's going to play where, and that may limit his time. I don't know, but again, last night in St. Louis, he continued to play effectively, and he was very noticeable on the ice. And I want maybe it's because he's 6'8", 250. I just like seeing that size player.
Some interview with him last night. Don't remind me.
Yeah, yes, I needed a step stool as well, and that's fine. But there's something about having an imposing figure like that. Oh, I don't know, in the playoffs against your arch rival. It won't take him long to get accustomed to what Pens versus Flyers is all about. But I'm intrigued to see how that plays out, though I will take a shining performance from any one of the kids or first-time players in the postseason, because that's when you need everyone to step up.
How about his
goal? I totally agree. And I like what you're saying about Soderblom, Dan. The thing about Soderblom that's interesting to me is that And with each game, you see him gaining more and more confidence of trying to make plays, offensive plays. And you bring up a good point about the fourth line, because when Lizotte was out and then Dewar went out, like I remember when Lizotte went out, we were all like, "Oh my gosh, who's going to replace him?"
Yeah.
And then Dewar went out, like, who's going to replace him? Like I was really concerned about that fourth line being disrupted, because they've been such an important part of the mix for the Penguins right since day one. Dan Muse has used them a lot. I think they've been a real key to the Penguins' success this year, and I felt like you couldn't disrupt that. You didn't want that to get disrupted. But sure enough, Lizotte goes down, then they get Soderblom. Now Dewar goes down, and I think one of those two will come back. But it is going to be interesting to see what they decide to do with that fourth line, because somebody has to come out. And you know what always happens? Every time people are talking about who's going to replace, who's going to come into the lineup, or come out of the lineup, I should say, when these guys return, and invariably somebody always gets hurt. It's like it happens every time. So while we were concerned about what's going to happen when Lizotte comes back, Dewar goes down. So it tends to work itself out, and it may not be in game one, but before the series is over, I wouldn't be surprised if everybody gets an opportunity.
Yeah, you mentioned Soderblom. He's done a really good job, I feel like, filling in on that fourth line. But for the PK, I think Lizotte, having him back, is going to be huge. I was looking, actually, the Penguins were second on the PK this season with Lizzo. And ever since they haven't had him, they're actually second to last in the league. So since March 14th, when he went down. I know it's not just Lizotte. I know there's been some other injuries too, but I feel like that's pretty telling, guys.
No, he's huge. He wins draws. He plays with that energy. He refers to himself as the team's motor everywhere he's played. I think he's an incredibly valuable player from a defensive standpoint. I think you're absolutely right, Hailey. I think if he comes back, that'll really solidify things from a defensive standpoint for the Penguins, and get them back to having that fourth line be a key sort of cog in the wheel for the Penguins. They're the line that Dan can put out there in defensive zone starts, and they do a great job in that regard. And also, he can bring them right back out after a power play or something like that to reestablish some momentum. They get the puck in the offensive zone, keep it there, and they kind of bring the energy level back up again. I think they're an incredibly important part of the mix.
You mentioned Staggy, or we talked about the importance of the fourth line. That's something that a team needs all season long, especially more so in the postseason. But when it comes to matchups, right, so big in the postseason, the last change and so forth, is there something intriguing about Kindle, Brazeau, and Mantha when it comes to matchups with the Flyers and whatever line they may see, and how that line can still be effective throughout the postseason?
Well, I love the size. The one thing Kyle Dubas kind of recognized was that he wanted to get bigger up front and get a little grittier. And, I think that line has that. I think it's good to have those two big experienced guys, especially Mantha, on either side of Kindle, who's not a big player. So I think they kind of insulate for him a little bit. And especially Mantha, the way he can finish. Kindle's a good playmaker. So I think those guys complement each other well. It will be interesting. There's no doubt that depth is the big part of it, like secondary scoring, because a lot of times the top lines cancel each other out, and it's those guys on the second or third, or think of the HBK line when the Penguins won the Cup in 2016. Sometimes it's that third line that can be the difference, because they get out there against the third D pair of the opposition, and you get a matchup advantage. And so I think the depth of the Penguins does give them an advantage. And we'll see. But the Flyers, I think they've gotten deeper by adding Alex Bump and Porter Martone, and they got Tyson Forrester back into their lineup. So they've kind of replenished their lineup in the sense that they're going to have more depth and more balance than they've had most of the year. And that could be a problem for the Penguins, except that, again, back to that experience thing, I think that could be the thing that prevails in the end.
Here, we don't just watch the Penguins. We live every tipped puck.
Unbelievable.
Every battle.
Give me more of this.
Every new prospect.
This is a glimpse of the future.
Everything you love about the Pens, we do too.
I'm down here between the benches.
You know what that means, Pens fans?
Cheers for that.
The fuck did they score?
We manifested it.
Stream the Penguins all season long on SNP 360.
You guys mentioned Anthony Mantha, what a season for him coming off ACL surgery. He's just the fifth Penguin, not named Sidney Crosby or Evgeny Malkin, thanks to Penguins PR for this stat, in the Crosby era to lead the team in goals, which is just incredible. But he actually mentioned after the game last night that Dan Muse called him going into the season and said, hey, I think you're going to score 30 goals with us. And he just mentioned how much confidence that gave him because, what coach is really going to have that expectation for a guy coming off of ACL surgery? But it's not just Mantha that's exceeded expectations this season. Just how much credit do you give, Staggy, to Dan Muse and just the confidence that he's instilled in all of these players that's clearly led to their success?
Well, I think that he's a guy that identifies a player's talents and what he can bring to his team, and then he tries to bring it out of them. That's basically the coach's job. The coach's job is to get his players to play the best hockey they're capable of playing. And Dan Muse has done that as well as any coach I've seen in the history of the Penguins. When you could talk to a guy like that, pat him on the back and say, hey, man, you're a good goal scorer, and I think you'll score 30 goals. He doesn't just say that to him as a person. He says that to him as a player and a piece of a puzzle. So he saw that Mantha could fit in with what the Penguins are going to be trying to do. That's a big part of it. I think Dan Muse creates the environment for a guy like Anthony Mantha to bring out his full potential and score 30 goals. So it's not like you're just pointing to a player and saying, you're going to do this. It's more like you're going to fit in with what we're doing. And I think as a result, you're going to score 30 goals. I think that's what's happened with the Penguins in general. I think that more than any coach, Dan Muse has really brought in a kind of a culture of the players realizing their own full potential and working together in a collective to really make it happen. It's been a really amazing thing to watch right from day one. And I think it's almost like he's empowering the players in some way. You heard what Erik Karlsson said. He just tells us what to do, and we kind of go out and do it. I really think there's a lot of that. It isn't that he hasn't created a structure and a concept of what he wants to do, but by playing the fourth line a lot, by rotating his goaltenders, by giving Ben Kindle a chance to get a lot of ice time as an 18-year-old, he's fostered that team concept. And then that enables a player like Anthony Mantha, who's got a lot of experience, knows how to put the puck in the net, just go out and play his game. Colby Armstrong calls him the Big Easy. That's what he looks like out there. When he scores a goal, it's like a walk in the park for him. It's amazing how easy he makes it look. And I think it's because he's feeling relaxed and he's just fitting right in with what the Penguins are doing. And he could be a big, big part of what the Penguins do in the playoffs with that size. He's going to play a little bit harder, too. Everybody hits, everybody blocks shots, everybody finishes their checks in the playoffs. That's just the way it is. That's why it's so great. It's so great to watch. Nobody's taking a night off or a shift off. And you got to really be ready to play as gritty a game as you could possibly play at this time of year. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how these Penguin players kind of bring that part of their game up.
Steggy, I just have to mention during your answer there, you said the piece again, and it reminded me of Rob Scuderi, and you mentioned his play back in the finals between the Pens and Wings in 08 and 09. It's not just the piece; it was the shift from Brooks Orpik. It was the trip by Marc-Andre Fleury when he took the ice to start the game. It was the text from Mario before Game 7. Just, again, talking about all these great moments from the past gets you excited about the playoffs and the postseason and what's coming just around the corner for all of us as the Penguins get ready to take on the Flyers. Sorry, I had to throw that in there. I got excited. Okay, I'll calm down.
No, I get it. Listen, guys, I have this thing, I call it my playoff primer. And I printed it because I made this years ago, okay? And it's what I've kind of all the various little things I've learned over the years. It really started with Badger Bob Johnson, right? And these are the things that I wrote down that kind of get you ready again for playoff hockey and the things you should be thinking about. So here's one. It's a marathon, not a sprint. Okay, do you have time for these? I'll get them to go through quick. It's a marathon, not a sprint. Special teams and goaltending. Adjustments. Initiate, don't retaliate. You can lose 3 and still win the series. Desperation is the fuel for motivation. You're only desperate if you're desperate. You can't create it. It's not something you manufacture. It comes to you when you absolutely are faced with a situation where you have to win. It's kind of, Mike Sullivan hated the word desperation. He liked urgency, but Sid still uses that word desperation. So does everybody else. I think it's a fitting word. First round is always the toughest, or at least often the toughest. Momentum can turn in your favor, even in a loss, which I learned in '89 when the Penguins had that big lead in that game where Mario had all those points, and the Flyers came back, scored a bunch of goals late in that game, didn't win it, but that momentum that they developed in that game carried over to the next game. And that can happen in the middle of a series. It's a war of attrition. Role players will always rise up. They always seem to be much more important at playoff time than they are during the regular season. The psychological warfare of the playoffs, that's a big deal. What coaches say between games, how they work the referees, through the media, lots of stuff like that goes on. It's so much fun. That's what makes the playoffs so much fun. Matchups are everything. We talked about that a little bit. Law of the jungle, survival. I remember Badger wrote that on the blackboard when the Penguins were down in that New Jersey series, the opening series in '91. They had to win Game 6 in that opening series in New Jersey. He wrote on the blackboard, Law of the jungle, survival. It was awesome. And the last one is home ice advantage with a question mark. I'm not so sure there is home ice advantage, especially early in the playoffs. So the Penguins might have it against the Flyers. It's not always necessarily an advantage. It can work against you if things aren't going your way. You get that tension in the crowd. Sometimes it can make you nervous. It kind of translates to the team and back to the crowd and back and forth like that. There's a symbiotic kind of relationship between the external stimulation of the fans in the playoffs. It can be nothing but great if you're winning and playing great because the fans go crazy. But if you're not having a good time on the ice, it can work against you. So watch for that because you'll notice the records are almost even for the road teams, especially early in the playoffs. So it can be not necessarily an advantage to be at home.
Okay, so first round is the toughest. That was one of them, right? Why? Take us through the meaning behind that.
Because I think all the teams are just raring to go. And they're leaving it all out there on the ice. And so in that first round, they're all trying to kill each other. It's unbelievable. And yeah, that's how you get upsets and sometimes injuries and some crazy things happen because everybody's thinking they might win the cup in that first round. And then, the cream usually rises to the top. But early in the playoffs, teams are often kind of on an even keel. Goaltending can make all the difference in the world in that regard. But also, I just think it's the energy that everybody brings to that first round.
No one gets you ready for puck drop like Penguins Face Off Live. Pre-game insights, analysis, and a word straight from the coach. Penguins Face Off Live before every game on SportsNet Pittsburgh. Presented by Highmark Blue Cross Blue Shield.
So that brings me to another question. With all those examples of motivational things that players can hear, they still have to go out and, of course, execute. And one advantage that the Penguins have had throughout the season has been their depth. We talk about a lot of not only the kids that have been brought in from Wilkes, a draft pick in Ben Kindle, or the free agents. How does that depth help this team, help any team in the postseason where everything is magnified?
Well, Dan, for one thing, Dan, from the runs the Penguins went on, you sometimes need as many as 9 defensemen to be able to win a cup. You got to have a lot of good defensemen in your stable. The Penguins have decent depth on defense, and sometimes the guys that you think are kind of marginal, if they get a chance to play, sometimes they can make a big impact because they have a heightened focus. And Brian Dumoulin said something to me that I thought was really cool, and I never forgot it. He said, I think it's easier to play defense in the playoffs than it is during the regular season. He said, the reason is I know who I'm up against every night. So I get used to their tendencies. I know how they play. Whereas in the regular season, if you're a defenseman that has to play against the top line every night, you're seeing a different group of players every night that you have to adjust to very quickly to defend against them. In the playoffs, you have a pretty good idea already. So I think in that regard, that's why you see, I think, teams kind of stick to one another in a series over the course of a series. They play so close and they're close checking and they become familiar with one another that it creates those tight, low-scoring playoff-style games. And I think that's important. But, back to the depth thing, you just got to have players all down through your lineup. And one of the things I said, role players rise up. Think of Craig Adams scoring a big goal for the Penguins, Think of Max Talbot scoring 2 goals to win the Cup in Detroit. Things like that. It's always role players who can make a difference. And again, it's like tipping the scales, because if you have guys down in your lineup who can rise up and play better, think of Noel Acciari. He's the classic guy who might score a huge goal in the playoffs. And, I hate to say you expect it, but you almost do. You almost want your role players to fulfill that, because that's kind of what you have to do to win in the playoffs.
You know what's impressive is I remember doing so many reports coming into this season on the fact that 68% of the team's goals last season came from their top 3 scorers on the team, Rusty, Raquel, Crosby. But now you look at this depth scoring, and it's been the exact opposite. 68% of the goals have come from players that aren't their top 3 scorers in Mantha, Crosby, and Russ. So, I mean, what a 360 this team has taken. And I talked about that with Ryan Shea. He also told me that he thinks a big part of that is just the closeness and the camaraderie of this team. I'm curious if you guys have felt that from this team, because he told me that he thinks that's going to be a big part of how these guys continue to stick together through the playoffs. He said ever since he got here 3 years ago, this is the closest he's felt that this team has been. And I will say, I see these guys go to dinner. It's not just 1, 2, 3 breaking off in groups. I mean, these poor restaurants, these are some large dinner reservations. It's usually the whole team going together.
Well, you know what? I said it. I think that Sid and Gino and Rusty are riding the wave, not making the wave this year. I feel like they've been inspired by all the other guys. They needed that. This is what the Penguins needed these last few years when they weren't getting into the playoffs. They needed to have more players come in who are hungry, who are inspired to play for one another, and they kind of rally around that idea of being sort of misfit toys all together, thrown in and trying to prove something. And I think that has just made Sid and Gino and Rusty play even harder, Letang. And so in a way, that's why you see those percentages change the way they have. It's not so much Sid dragging them with him. It's like them pushing him along. And so now he's like really excited about that. And now is the time, though, where you want Sid and Rusty and Gino to rise up and maybe play at that other level that you haven't even seen yet this year for this team in this season. So I think this is the really interesting aspect of this playoff series, is that we talk about their experience, having won cups, all that. Now we get a chance to see what that really means with this group of players when they get into the playoffs. And I think it's going to be fascinating to watch. And I do think that it'll be a little bit of a fountain of youth kind of situation where some of these guys are going to harken back to their glory days and really enjoy the opportunity to play in playoff hockey again, which I'm really looking forward to because there's nothing like it.
Staggy, you mentioned the youth. Let's not forget about the old guys. And that brings us to our weekly look back at the 10th anniversary of the 2016 Stanley Cup team. Dad, Matt Cullen, was brought in to be a leader, not only in the room, but on the ice for the Pittsburgh Penguins. And he exceeded in both, including scoring the game-winning goal in the third period of Game 3 against the Rangers. The Penguins will go on to take the next 2 games and beat the Rangers en route to a Stanley Cup championship. And again, you talk about chemistry, family, how things really need to come together. A team needs to be closely knit. He was kind of like just mellow. Just, he didn't say a lot, but when he played on the ice, right, he made his presence, he made some noise.
He had a calming effect.
He did.
I watched that 2016 game, the opening game, Game 1 against the New York Rangers. And I don't know if you guys saw that telecast. It was just on SNP 360 the other night. So I watched it, and I happened to see, I didn't see the whole game, but I saw a portion of it where Bob Airey interviews Matt Cullen on the bench during one of the breaks. And the Penguins have gotten off to a bit of a slow start, and they're not playing that great. And Matt Cullen says, he's like leaning against the boards. You'd think he was like, you ran into him in a trail, in the park or something. He was just so calm. And he's talking to Bobby, and he's just saying, we kind of got off to a little bit of a slow start. We just need to calm down a little bit. We're going to be fine. So don't worry about it, And then Bobby and I both commented on it coming out of the interview, like, wow, there's a wise man right there. Like, you can just tell. So if he's doing that in an interview with Bob Airey, that's transmitting to everybody on the bench, in the locker room. So he's like a coach in the room. And I don't know who you'd put in that category now for the Penguins, but ironically, he was the old guy to those young players. and that was 10 years ago. Not quite as young as they were in '09, obviously, but I don't know who would be in that category now. Who would be the calming sort of effect on the Penguins now? Erik Karlsson has kind of a calming effect at times,
Yes. Yep.
but he
Yeah.
also plays a little bit. But he also can be a little risky with his game. So, and that's something Matt Cullen would never have been. So, maybe it's a guy like Brian Rust. Who always scores big goals. He's a clutch player, and he's now a veteran player. He's like a Chris Kunitz was back then. So, I think a lot of these roles or these effects that a particular player can have, they kind of reveal themselves during the playoffs. So you may not even know who that guy's going to be. It might be Anthony Mantha. I mean, it could be somebody like that who's kind of calm anyway, as we said. So that's an important thing, though, Dan, because it gets frenetic at times, and you do need to have a player or players who know how to calm everything down. Brian Trottier was great at that. When things were getting crazy and the momentum's going against you, and you feel like, oh my, you can feel it in the stands. It's like you're afraid somebody's going to make a mistake or whatever. And a guy who's sure-handed, like a Brian Trottier, will get the puck in his own end and he'll take a couple of strides and he'll just dump it softly into the offensive zone. And everybody calms down. You know what I mean? It's like that. You have guys like that in your locker room who are capable of playing those kinds of games. I think the Penguins will be fine in that department. And they're going to have the energy of a Blake Lizotte. They're going to have the experience of Brian Rust. They're going to have the dynamic abilities and two-way play of Sidney Crosby. And of course, Gino, he can bring his game to a completely different level. I mean, we've seen it already this year, just recently, a couple of games where he just looked like he was young again. And imagine how excited he's going to be back in the playoffs. These guys haven't played in 3 years. And don't you think they weren't sick of watching games on TV the last few years and not being involved in it? And I think that the opportunities come back now for them to maybe take one more. We thought that window was slammed shut, right? Well, maybe there's a little crack in that window now that can even be opened even further if the Penguins can find a way to win this first series and really start to believe that they can win playoff-style hockey, which I think they should be able to do.
Oh, man. Gino, you know how he is when he takes a couple of games off, as he has recently. So I don't think the Flyers are ready for Evgeny Malkin in this first playoff series. But okay, we got to talk about the $1 million question. What's your guys' predictions? Who do you think's going to win this first round, and in how many games? Because I know some of us probably don't want to say it's not going to be the Penguins. We all want the Penguins to win.
Yeah, we do. And I think, there's a 6-game series is considered a long series. A 5-game series is considered a short series. That's only a 1-game difference, but you know what I mean. I think this will be a 6-game series. That's what it was in 18 when the Penguins were defending Stanley Cup champions. The Flyers gave the Penguins fits that year. And I knew they would because it's just what they do, right? And I think they'll give the Penguins some fits again this year. But I think the Penguins will prevail. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I remember many years ago, the Winnipeg Jets took the Oilers to like 7 games in a series, way back when the Oilers were first winning cups. And Wayne Gretzky said it was really good for us to be forced to play our best hockey in the first round. And I think that could happen here, where the Flyers just annoy the Penguins enough that they're forced to dig down a little deeper to win. And I think that serves you for when you move on in the playoffs. You don't want it to be too easy. It has to be a little bit hard. You need that adversity, I think. And one thing that I think will serve the Penguins well, we talked about the regular season and how it's in the past now. But the one thing they did develop in the regular season was that resilience. Remember Dan Muse saying after they came from behind in one of the games, he said, "We own that now. We know we can do it." And then there were several more games after that where they did the same thing. And I think with Stu Skinner's built-in resilience that he's kind of gathered over his 3 years, he's played 50 playoff games the last 3 years. I think his resilience and the team's resilience will come in real handy in the playoffs, because there's going to be a night when they don't win and they've got to bounce back, or a period where things don't go well and they've got to turn it around. All those things are going to happen in a shorter period of time. It's all condensed and it's intense. So I think the Penguins will overcome, and I'm going to say 6.
Okay, I'm also saying 6. I think it's going to be even the first 4 games, and then I think the Penguins are going to get it done. What do you think, Dan?
I'm still doing some homework, more so on the Flyers and the Penguins. I know they had a ridiculously good record
Yeah.
from the Olympic break on. Obviously, their defense is very good. I need to see how healthy they are. I'd like to know a little bit more about the future of Lizotte and Dewar as far as returning to the lineup. But if I'm just looking at the series like as is right now, I do think there's something unique about the Penguins having the big three back in the postseason for the first time since 2022. That veteran leadership and all that they've been through together, ups and downs, challenges and things that they've faced in other playoff games over 2 decades. I think that will be a big factor in helping the Penguins, though I do think it will go 7 games just because somewhere along the line, and we talked about it earlier in the show, the old Penguins-Flyers rivalry will come into the mix and add some much-needed drama that we all love to watch and see, as long as it ends the way we want it to. And you know what I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah. Hey, can you guys see this picture behind me?
Yeah.
That's Mario.
That's Mario with a Crocodile Dundee hat on.
I was going to say, what is that
boy.
hat?
I took him to have his picture taken for one of these posters or something we did back in the early, I think it was like 85, 86 season. And it was in a photog studio downtown. And the guy had a couple of props, and he threw that hat on Mario, took that picture. It's an awesome picture. I think I only printed 2 of those big ones. One of them we gave to Nancy Matthews. The Matthews family is where he lived when he first came to Pittsburgh, and because she just loved that smile, because it was a side of Mario that a lot of people didn't see, but she kind of really appreciated it because he lived at her house for a long time. But anyway, I thought you might get a kick out of that because I have it behind me.
What a cool canvas. I was wondering what that was behind you, so I'm glad you finally told us. That's awesome. Really, really cool, Staggy. Hey, remind us what that list was that you read for us. What's the name of it again? Of all the most important
It's
things?
my playoff primer. That's my playoff primer.
That.
I'll send it to you guys. I'll email it to you guys so you have it. And then, really I
cool.
like it because it does remind me of the one thing is initiate, don't retaliate. That's a good one because you don't want to be out there retaliating. Remember the last time the Penguins were in the playoffs and they played the Rangers and Evan Rodriguez, Dan, took that penalty against the Rangers. They scored on the power play. He retaliated, and he got the call. And the Penguins were shorthanded. Rangers scored. It turned the whole series. The Rangers ended up winning. You got to be really careful with that stuff because they're going to try to push buttons, and the Penguins have to be able to turn the other cheek and not let it get to them.
Got to be calm. Be the bigger person, right? Well, Staggy, it was so great to have you on. We got to have you on more often. You're awesome. And that's going to do it for this week's episode of Get Me The Brandy. Looking forward to a lot more Get Me The Brandy episodes throughout the postseason. For Dan Staggy.
Hey, can I interrupt for 1 second, Hailey? One more thing I want to tell you because I wanted to mention this.
Staggy.
I was sitting next to Mike Lang when he said, Lord Stanley, get me the brandy. Get me the brandy. I was right next to him when he said it in Chicago. It was a fun night in Chicago when we won the cup. We swept the Hawks in 92.
I love that you love the name. See, that's why we got to have you on more often. All right, now that's going to do it for Get Me The Brandy because we're so grateful that Staggy loves the name.
Oh, Lord Stanley, get me